Me, an empath, sensing that this YouTube video is about to start. Last year, a meme sprung up on TikTok making fun of people who were self-proclaimed empaths. People who think they have some special ability to feel more emotionally connected to other people's feelings. Someone who used the term empath a lot in their videos was former golden child of YouTube, he who will not be named. These memes served as a great way to show people that empathy is pretty much ingrained in most people, and it doesn't really mean that that is the only thing you need in life to be a good person. Feeling happy if you see someone else laugh, or feeling a twinge of pain if you see someone falling off a skateboard, just means you're human. Being empathetic or being an empath isn't the only thing that someone should strive for, and in fact, sometimes it causes more harm than good. Empathy alone will not lead someone to act. A person could feel empathetic towards someone else's struggle, but that doesn't mean they can or will help out. There has to be something past just feelings that would make someone reach out a helping hand. This is what compassion would entail. Compassion is having sympathy and empathy for someone while also having the desire to help them out. The Latin roots of this word are to suffer with. The person who is being helped out isn't suffering alone because someone else is right there with them along the way. It's this strong desire to act on empathy that is a core part of the anime and manga series I am talking about today, Natsume's Book of Friends. Natsume's Book of Friends is a currently ongoing shoujo manga series that started its serialization in 2005. It was written by Yuki Midorikawa, who is a pretty prevalent shoujo mangaka before Natsume's Book of Friends even began. Since it first released, Natsume's Book of Friends has become a widely acclaimed anime and manga series, receiving several season adaptations, which a lot of shoujos don't get. Along with one of the characters, Nyanko-sensei, becoming super popular merch-wise in Japan, where you could basically see him in every store. Side note, unfortunately for me, this isn't the case in America because I cannot find good Nyanko-sensei plushies anywhere. I wanted to sit in a throne of them for this video, and it just didn't work out. The series is an episodic story about a high school boy named Natsume who has the ability to see yokai. He's been able to see them ever since childhood, and because of this, his life has been incredibly difficult. Between being called creepy or a liar as a child, being bullied by yokai, and having his guardians be scared of him, Natsume wasn't able to connect with anyone. Since his parents died, he's been passed from distant relative to distant relative until he ended up in the Fujiwara's household. Their home is in the town where his grandmother Reiko used to live, and it turns out that she also had the ability to see yokai. As soon as Natsume starts living with the Fujiwaras, though, yokai begin harassing him more than they usually did before. This is because they're mistaking him for his grandma and insisting that they return the names that he stole from them. After doing some digging in the family home, Natsume comes to find out that Reiko actually had something called the Book of Friends. And in this book, she has the names of the yokai that she bullied, giving her the ability to summon them whenever she felt like it. The book holds immense power that some yokai either want for themselves or others just want their names removed so they can go on living their own lives. Along with the help of the beast yokai Madara that Natsume has nicknamed Nyanko-sensei, Natsume helps to return the names of the yokai that his grandmother took. Compassion is a central theme in this manga, which weaves its way through every facet of Natsume's interactions in his life. It's a waterfall that begins with the Fujiwaras bringing Natsume into their household and showing him true familial love, which then pulls out into Natsume doing good for others. This trickle-down effect of compassion is a core element of not just the series, but of Natsume as a character as well. He's only known loneliness and sadness as a child, so when a family comes along that actually treats him with care, this has such a huge impact on him. And this impact starts with how he treats the yokai that he dislikes so much when he was growing up. You would think that Natsume would be a pretty uncaring and hateful kid, the way that he grew up being bullied, harassed, or attacked by these yokai whenever they found out that he could see them. Despite this though, they were some of the only things that would talk to him or give him comfort. In flashbacks to his childhood, he clearly doesn't mind yokai, and especially when they're not picking on him. His issue has always been how seeing them makes him isolated from others, as he can't tell the difference whether they're real or not at times. The yokai also just don't make any sense to him, and and instead of trying to get to know them better, he just labels them all as bullies. The biggest example of this is in volume 4 of the manga, during a special chapter that shows a flashback to Natsume's childhood. Natsume is being bullied by some kids in his class when a local yokai stops them from doing so. However, when Natsume locks eyes with this yokai, it realizes that he can see them and begins to pick on him instead. This yokai pops out of trees and bushes to scare him and gets a kick out of his reaction every single time. It begins to follow Natsume to different places, but he ends up getting used to it and asks the yokai why it's so concerned with him. However, he's visibly let down whenever it claims that it in fact doesn't care about Natsume at all. This is clearly not true though, as during the chapter we get to see a little bit of the yokai's inner thoughts, and it clearly enjoys being around Natsume. The two end up having an altercation, which just gives Natsume more childhood trauma, and Natsume ends up moving to a new home before this yokai can even apologize for what it did. I believe that this interaction between a semi-friendly yokai and Natsume shows that he doesn't have any hard feelings towards them in general. In fact, he even likes having them acknowledge him, see him, and talk to him without feeling like he has to put on an act like he does for real people. His own desire to be understood is one of the reasons why he became so compassionate towards yokai. They themselves are also incredibly misunderstood and lonely, as people who would interact with them can't see them. While at first, Natsume didn't try to learn anything about the yokai out of fear, he gradually starts to learn more about them and begin to empathize with their situations. He still isn't entirely eager to get involved with yokai problems though, and only helps when he feels he has to. The turning point for Natsume's attitude towards yokai doesn't really happen until volume 3, chapter 10, which is one of my favorite yokai-centered chapters. This chapter is where I feel like Natsume went from a timid bystander to someone who has actual compassion and a sense of duty to help out yokai. During this time, we're introduced to the possibility that not only can other people see yokai, but also Natsume might lose the ability to see them in the future. That possibility is something that Natsume once desired and longed for, but throughout this chapter he realizes that seeing yokai might not be a curse, but a gift. This perspective shift is when I believe Natsume goes from empathy to compassion. We start the chapter with Natsume asking around about a good place in town to see fireflies. He ends up going to a marsh with Nyanko-sensei, and the two end up finding a man lying on the ground there. After exchanging a few words, the man leaves and Natsume notices that he has a yokai hanging off of him. The yokai locks eyes with him and gets excited because it realizes a human child is able to see it. Their name is Kyo, and they go on to explain to Natsume that they're actually friends with the man that they were attached to. His name is Akifumi, and he used to be able to see yokai, but lost the ability when he got older. Kyo states that Akifumi is about to be married soon, and until that day, they're going to be staying with Natsume. Obviously, Natsume becomes more curious about Akifumi, and he goes to the marsh again, hoping to find him. However, he comes to the realization that maybe Akifumi doesn't want to remember the time that he was able to see yokai, since this is something that Natsume himself wants so badly not to have. But if Akifumi truly wants to forget, this would mean that while they were friends, he no longer wants to remember his time with Kyo and their bond that they shared together. This thought that Natsume has only makes him more compassionate towards Kyo, as he thinks that many people in his own life have probably wanted to forget their time with him as well. After Akifumi finally sits down with Natsume, he tells him that he too had a hard childhood because he was able to see yokai, but that doesn't mean that he ever wants to forget about his time with Kyo. The two loved each other deeply and gave solace during times of hardship and loneliness. This conversation with Akifumi was incredibly eye-opening for Natsume, as he's never really thought about losing his bond with the yokai, and especially now that he has Nyanko-sensei, who he's become so attached to. At this point in time, he'd probably tell you he isn't attached to Nyanko-sensei, but don't let that fool you, those two are friends. Kyo learns about Akifumi's current happiness and decides it's their time to finally move on as well. While Natsume does try to stop them from doing so, the yokai returns to its true form as a firefly, and it remembers its name that Akifumi once gave them, Hotaru. For one last and final time, they go to visit Akifumi and his future wife to wish him happiness. As Hotaru lands on him to say their goodbyes, the marsh starts to light up once more with the return of other fireflies. This entire chapter is the first time that Natsume really realized that his life amongst the yokai might be fleeting. He's not guaranteed to have the ability to see them for the rest of his life. While being unable to see yokai is something he strongly desired in the past, His new life of interacting with them and with Nyanko-sensei has already begun to have an effect on him. Not only was the bond between Akifumi and Hotaru strong, but it was also strong between Natsume and Hotaru even in the short time that they were around. He came to genuinely care for the yokai, sharing in their suffering as he also longs to be seen. This realization and relationship with Hotaru makes Natsume realize that being able to see yokai and not do anything is incredibly difficult. He was empathetic towards them before, but now he's become compassionate, finding the yokai to be complex creatures who might also have similar desires to that of humans, feeling loneliness and sadness just like Natsume does. The compassion he has for yokai from then on is one of the key advantages of showing compassion that an article from the Philosopher's Takes discusses. Seeing that someone else shares in your pain may help reassure the sufferer that the seriousness of his or her suffering is being appreciated and taken seriously. Natsume showing compassion helps him foster this community of yokai who trust him and he trusts in return. Sharing in their suffering isn't just beneficial for the yokai, but for Natsume as well. He's learning how to heal from his own trauma and grief by being compassionate to those around him. One of the first times we get a clear look into how Natsume's childhood caused him so much trauma is during Volume 8. This is also the volume where we start focusing a little bit more on Natsume's human relationships. How navigating these connections to real people may be even harder for him than it is connecting with yokai, and how Natsume needs to deal with his trust issues. Up to this point, Natsume hasn't had a single human relationship that didn't end poorly, and this volume is him facing that fact head on. Specifically in chapters 30 and 31, when we see a flashback of Natsume when he was at his breaking point, thinking he was never going to be someone worthy of love. During these chapters, Natsume gets attacked by a yokai from a previous town that he lived in, and when he falls ill because of this, Natsume begins to dream of his past. He begins to recall about how his previous household before the Fujiwaras was suffocating him. The family was nice enough, but they never showed him the love or compassion that he needed. They were scared of him, thinking he was a dangerous boy that would cause them problems. On top of that, the family that he was staying with already had a son, and a normal son at that, something that Natsume could never compete with. He was starting to give up on finding a family that would ever care for him and a place that he could call home. When Natsume lived with his family, there was a yokai that he would run into every now and then. At first, it gave him no troubles, but the more the two met, the more the yokai seemed a bit more hostile. It kept gaining an interest in Natsume because of how lonely he is, and loneliness made him a perfect target. At the same time though, the Fujiwaras made their first appearance in Natsume's life. One night he runs into them when he's trying to find reprieve from his home life, and it's here that he finds some semblance of kindness given to him. Not only this, but they also ask him to come live with them. However, when the yokai sees Natsume showing an inkling of interest in people, it gets angry, telling him that he's supposed to stay lonely forever, and if he comes with them, they'll teach him more about yokai. Natsume starts to get frightened that this yokai is going to attack the family he's staying with as well. He starts to think that if he's the cause of any harm that comes to the people he lives with, then he definitely doesn't deserve to be loved. The yokai only affirms this as well, as they say, "I thought humans loved their young unconditionally, so why don't they love you?" To which Natsume can only respond, "Of course they don't. I'm not normal." At first, the yokai was able to convince Natsume to come with them, until he returns home to say his goodbyes and sees that the Fujiwaras came to try and convince him once more to come live with them. He didn't think that he deserved their kindness, but he wants it so bad. He wants to have someone feel love towards him, and he wants to be shown compassion. So instead of running away from the yokai, Natsume decides to deal with it, so that it can never cause harm to the Fujiwaras when he goes to live with them. He tries desperately to find a way to exorcise this yokai, and in the end, when he seals it, the force of its power knocks Natsume off of a cliff. He finds himself in a hospital room, hearing his current family talk about how much trouble he is, and how the Fujiwaras are probably not going to want to take him in anymore. However, when he awakens once more, the Fujiwaras are right there by his side, asking him once again to come stay with them. This brings Natsume to tears, as he's never wanted something so much in his life than to go live with them. As he's crying and the Fujiwaras are comforting him, we start to float out of this dream of his past. In the present, as Natsume comes to, we see that Nyanko-sensei protected him from the yokai from his past. And we end the chapter with Natsume saying that this is the place he wants to call home. The Fujiwaras are such a pivotal part of Natsume's life that as the first people to show him kindness, they're affecting how Natsume treats others too. When someone is compassionate towards a person, this leads this person to be compassionate towards others as well. The compassion he receives from them is how he talks to the yokai in kind, because compassion is something that is learned. Before living with the Fujiwaras, Natsume was never so deeply involved with the yokai, and in fact didn't even want to be able to see them. But the more time he spends in such a kind home, it makes him just as kind. It isn't just the Fujiwaras that help Natsume learn about this kind of compassion though. It's also his friends. As the more time in his new school goes on, the more connections he makes with his classmates. Natsume also spends less time feeling like he has to lie about his powers, because he starts to meet people who have this same ability, whether it's a weaker version of it or not. He's found people that he can trust and rely on, even just a little bit more than he ever could before. This learned compassion from both family and friends has made him more susceptible to be compassionate towards non-humans that he interacts with too. Now, with all that being said, is Natsume too compassionate? He's constantly throwing himself into harm's way for these yokai, and with little regard for his own safety at times. You would think he would eventually get mental burnout from compassion fatigue, but this isn't exactly a thing. Empathy fatigue is, however. Compassion is about acting on your empathy and helping people out. You're less likely to get burnout from this because there's often an outcome or a change. Whereas if you're just empathizing with someone and unable to do anything about their situation, you'll be continually feeling that empathy to no end. Natsume is able to keep helping out these yokai because it gives him a sense of pride and joy. He's able to actually do something for these yokai instead of just commiserating with them and ultimately doing nothing. The compassion he feels towards those in need doesn't make him feel worn out or weary, but fulfilled in life. In fact, one of the few times where he was actually fatigued when trying to fix a yokai problem was when there was really nothing he could do in the end to fix the issue. This weighed more heavily on him than any time where he had reached out to help a yokai and in the end had been hurt more himself. Should Natsume be putting himself in danger for these reasons? Absolutely not. He's just a kid. But his compassion won't allow him otherwise. In this manga, compassion is shown to have a ripple effect. Since Natsume grew up so lonely with no close family or friends due to his ability to see yokai, he isolated himself and pulled away from being social. However, it was living with the Fujiwaras that made him open up again. The compassion and kindness that he received from them is how Natsume started making friends with similar interests and abilities as him. Learning to be loved has made him a more compassionate person, which in turn has made him more concerned about the yokai. He begins to have an inherent need to help them, not just out of duty, but genuine kindness and care. The yokai recognize this kindness from a human as well. While Natsume is wary of yokai at first, it also makes sense that yokai are also wary of humans. They're dangerous, they can ruin their lives or exercise them, but Natsume showing compassion towards yokai is what makes them a little more trustworthy of humans in general. They start to hang out with Natsume, whether he wants them to or not sometimes, as well as come to him when they have troubles. This cycle of trust between them is what fuels Natsume to continue to be just as compassionate as he had before, and he can see this effective change that he's having on yokai as well. Compassion plays such a huge role in Natsume's book of friends. Without compassion, this manga would not have the heart that it does. Without compassion, Natsume wouldn't feel like such a kind and heartwarming character that we so desperately need written during these times. Compassion helped Natsume deal with his loneliness and gave him a reason to help out others in return. The Fujiwara's love for Natsume was a ripple in a pool of compassion that they could have never imagined the depths to which it would reach.